I read it on the train going to New York this past weekend and just lost myself for about a half hour reading it. It was so good.
Well, that's good. I hope you didn't miss your stop, but I appreciate that.
My stop was Grand Central, so it was kind of hard to miss that one.
Hard to miss that, yeah.
Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, a podcast about writing. I'm Dr. Brian Morris. Today's guest is Michael Rosenberg from Sports Illustrated. Michael Rosenberg, welcome to The Other 51. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
And I'm really looking forward. This is our first episode of 2019, and couldn't be more thrilled to have you on for this one to talk about just an outstanding piece that you wrote for Sports Illustrated about Todd Marinovich, and looking forward to having a good discussion about the entire piece.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I guess to start off, I kind of want to do a deep dive into the whole process about it. If you can think back, before you even started writing the piece, do you remember kind of when Todd Marinovich got on your radar? Like, do you remember reading that original 1988 profile in Sports Illustrated? Like, kind of like your history with Todd Marinovich and that story before you started this piece?
I do remember it. I was, in 88, I would have been in probably 8th or ninth grade. And, that was, I was a huge sports fan. I devoured Sports Illustrated every week. Even then, I knew I wanted to be a sports writer, and it was just one of the stories that really stood out. It was just unique, and especially, in the '80s when the idea of organic food had not quite taken hold nationally, and we were all eating, Big Macs and junk. This idea that this guy had been trained almost from birth to be a football player, and hadn't had any sugars and processed foods and all that. It was just so different from everything else. And that was at a time when, sports were really becoming this big business, and you were starting to see this kind of, the crazy sports parents. And Marv Marinovich, which is a memorable name, just kind of took hold, I think, in the culture. And I've always, I've never forgotten that story. It's not when I went back and said, oh yeah, I mean, that's always sort of been something that, a touchstone, I think, for the culture.
It was so funny that so high up in the piece, you mentioned that tidbit about the Big Mac and the Oreos and the Ding Dong, which is such a weirdly specific thing to have mentioned because, yeah, you're right. Like now, I think you and I both know kids or parents who haven't eaten processed, who eat, better than we did growing up in the 80s. And that's not such a big thing, but it was I remember that when you wrote that and when I read that, I remember that being the big deal of this story. Like, oh my God, this kid's never had a Big Mac. And it was so alien at the time. It was and it's such a kind of a lost detail now, but yeah, it was so alien at the time to think of that.
Yeah, and one thing Todd said to me, he said I had no idea what a freak show they would make the diet out to be.
Right.
Like he just didn't realize it's weird when you get just a little dose of fame that what people remember. They don't remember your whole story necessarily, but they'll latch on to one certain thing, maybe a missed field goal if you're a kicker, whatever it is. That's all Scott Norwood's remembered for, no matter what else he did, right, is missing one field goal. So, and that's it for Todd Marinovich. That's one of the 2 or 3 things people really remember is that diet.
Right. So in terms of writing the story, and one of the things I found very interesting about it is that there's no news hook here. It's, when I teach my feature writing sections of my classes, you talk about a news hook and how that can be important. And there's not that here. It's not like he was hired by the Raiders or signed with some team. And that's the impetus for the story. So I'm wondering, how did the story come about? Like, what started you down the path of writing and reporting this in the first place?
Well, a year ago, I guess a year and a half or so now, there was a story in the New York Times. It was one of those kind of short features that they had about Todd Marinovich playing semi-pro football. And it was, 1,500 words, whatever it was. It was a good story, but there was one sentence in there about how his dad had dementia. And it struck me right away. I said, that's a story that I'm curious about. And at the time, what I thought was, well, maybe he just wants his dad to see him play one last time while he still knows what he's watching,
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought was going on, which is, of course, you read the story, is not really the case, but
Right.
it just seemed like there had to be a connection, which there was, between Marv's dementia and Todd playing. And one thing I think as a writer that I'm always trying to do is you want to find unique stories that are also universal. If you can find a story that's both, you really have a chance to connect with people. And obviously we know this is a unique story with the childhood and the diet and all that. But what I thought was universal was when you get to a certain age and your parents get to a certain age, you start to realize that story of your relationship has been written. There's not another chapter. I mean, you may hope it lasts, but you start to make your peace with and understand, like, the good and the bad. That's it. There's no fixing. There's no improving. It's hopefully not going to get worse. Like, that's it. And I thought that's the story that I want to know. Like, okay, here's this guy in his 40s, his famous dad and their relationship. He's in his 70s. You kind of take stock of the whole thing. And I thought that's what he was doing with football. I didn't really know what the whole story was. I mean, I had no way of knowing until I started reporting it.
Right. So, I mean, when you get at that point, do you like talk to an editor about it and say, this is kind of what I want to do? Do you kind of go off on your own and start reporting and see what comes and then talk to an editor? Like, what's kind of like the selling portion of this story at this stage of it?
Well, I'll do some research, some reading. I'll make some calls. It really depends on the story. In this case, I watched the Marinovich project, the 30 for 30 that had been done on him,
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, from the story, some of that turned out not to be true through no fault of the producers. Todd lied to them. But I didn't know that. I had no way of knowing that at the time. So, and then I told them what I just said to you, that I think there's something here about this guy trying to connect with his father, trying to make sense of it, trying to make sense of what that relationship had been at this point in his life. And there was a little bit of blind faith, I guess, from the editors. A couple of them were not quite sure where it was going. They thought, well, this story's been done. You don't really, it's a tricky thing in the media, especially these days with tight budgets, is that you don't know what the story is until you report it. But to report it requires some time and some resources and some money and travel and all that, and they don't want to do that unless they know what the story is. So
Right.
There was a little bit of okay, you go do this and come back with something hopefully good, and it worked out. But I'm lucky to be at SI where they want these stories. I mean, there are some places that don't even, frankly, want these kinds of stories. They just want the daily kind of thing, and SI is still trying, and I think we've got a number of people that do them really well.
Is that one of the, kind of looking at your career as a general before we get back to the specific story, but I know you were a newspaper columnist for a long time before going to SI. Aside from that kind of national scale, I mean, what are the differences in terms of being a writer and a reporter at SI? Like, what was the biggest transition for you going from a newspaper columnist and a newspaper columnist style and kind of mindset schedule to an SI mindset?
Well, there were a lot of changes. It's really challenging. In my mind, as someone who grew up reading the magazine, every time I sit down, I'm thinking Bill Nack, Frank DeFord, Rick Riley, Dan Jenkins. That's which is really messes with your head, because that's a standard they didn't even hit every time.
Right.
That's thinking, I want that.
I was gonna say that's a hell of a curve you grade yourself on, right?
Well, there's a reason that so many writers end up as alcoholics. But yeah, exactly. It's weird though, because nobody sits down and thinks, I want this to be as good as Frank DeFord's worst story. Nobody thinks that. They think, I want this to be as good as Frank DeFord on Bobby Knight or whatever, when it was best. And then so many of them were so great. So I would say the biggest challenge for me actually is it'll sound backwards, but when I was at the Detroit Free Press, it was easier to find stories that would resonate with my audience because it was concentrated. Mm-hmm. Easier than it is at Sports Illustrated. So if it was a Tuesday as a columnist in Detroit, I could just go to Lions, or Wednesday, whatever it is, whenever they have practice, I could just go there and find something. And it's the Detroit Lions. Everybody, people want to read it. Well, I can't do that now at Sports Illustrated. I can't just go write like a Detroit Lions column twice a week. So that's been a challenge, finding the right story. But it's been so rewarding because they really do want to feel like they're doing the best journalism of any sports outlet, and obviously no one's ever going to have a monopoly on it. But when you have that aspiration, you have a chance to do good work, and that's why I'm fortunate.
So getting back to the Marinovich story, you kind of get this idea. You read the Times story. Now, what's your as a reporter? What's your next? You watched the documentary. You probably did a little research, I assume. What's your next step then?
Well, it took a while to get a hold of Todd. As it turned out, he was in prison at part of it. So I had tried various means of getting him, and I finally one day. I think I called and didn't leave a message. You're always conscious of, am I badgering this person? And I didn't leave a message, and all of a sudden, I looked down on my phone like 10 minutes later, and he was calling me back. And because I don't think he knew who he was calling back. He just saw he'd missed the call. And so from there, we just set up I explained what I was trying to do, and it resonated with him, the idea of his dad at this point in his life and him at this point in his life, and trying to make sense of it. That he really was interested in that. And so I went out there in September, and you just build the trust over time. And where I was fortunate is Todd is at a point in his life where it is so important to him, like a lot of recovering addicts, to be authentic, to tell the truth, and to get that whole truth out there. So some of it does not make him look good, but he would rather have that out there than hide it, because he knows that's trouble for him.
So how long into that relationship, if you can recall, did kind of the lie get exposed? I know that sounds a weird way of putting it, but how long before you were out there did like the story that you ended up writing, when did that start coming out and taking shape?
It was probably the second day.
Oh, wow.
I'm guessing that we were together. It was not the first time we sat down was an hour or two. The other thing is, nobody wants to go to therapy for like 12 straight hours, right? So you need to give these people a little time to breathe. I mean, I just met him, and all of a sudden, it's weird. You wouldn't do that on a first date. Be like, tell me about the worst thing that happened in your childhood. But as a reporter, that's where you're going. So that it takes some time to do that. You got to give them a little time on their own. But on the second day, we really started to really get into the history in his childhood, and how he felt about it and what it was really like. And it was so complicated. And what was kind of interesting as a reporter was I'm talking to somebody who's really trying to figure out his own psychology at the same time that I am. I joked with him. I said, Todd, you've done my work for me here, because normally you're probing things that people are reluctant to probe, but it was essential for him to probe it, to really understand himself. So, and he wasn't quite there yet when I first got him. And so that was a lot of conversations over a few months before we really got all the details down, the nuance of it, and obviously reporting, talking to other people as well.
Sure. I mean, do you remember your reaction when he was opening up and you kind of realized kind of your own kind of personal holy crap moment, that this is the story, that the story is going this way as opposed to maybe what you thought it was? Do you remember that moment? I
don't have a specific moment, because sometimes you do get that where somebody drops something and you think, oh my gosh, that's going in the story. Like
right.
I know that is going in there. I remember him saying it was misguided. It wasn't quite what happened. And I remember the first time I sat down with him where I said, people are just connecting your childhood to your addiction like nobody else has ever been an addict. Like maybe you would have been anyway, and so there's a lot of sort of focusing and getting on the right thing. I don't have that one aha moment. But I just do remember on that second day when we were having breakfast and walking around and talking about a whole bunch of stuff, I just remember thinking we are really getting deep into the psychology of somebody who's had this fascinating life. And that appealed to me. I really, until publication, didn't know if anybody else would find it that interesting. But I felt like there was a good story there.
So what specifically was so interesting about that to you as you're reporting this and as you're thinking it through before you even write it? Like specifically, like what is drawing you to, what drew you so deeply into this?
Well, I'm really fascinated by how our lives are defined, or our paths are, I guess, plowed by some combination of internal chemistry, genetics, circumstance, personalities, moments, times and you can't necessarily figure out exactly why the mix made things happen the way they did. But for someone like him to really go back and say this happened and that happened, and I didn't even realize this was happening for 20 years or more. That's fascinating to me, much more than all the different drugs somebody did or all the terrible things they did while they were doing drugs, because we know he was an addict. How many different kinds of heroin he did wasn't that interesting to me. And it's in the story, and he was very open about it. He stole from pretty much everyone in his family, usually in small amounts, his grandparents, mother, siblings, because his sister, because he just needed money for drugs. And of course that's horrible, and the guilt is always going to be there for him. But I wasn't going to build a whole story on that kind of thing. How he got there was really what interests me.
And of course, on a story like this, and if you haven't read the story, we should have done a spoiler alert at the beginning. But read the story before. Make sure you read the story, because it's so multi-layered and so well reported. And the reporting on it is, it's not just Todd. Obviously, you spend time with his sister, you spend time with Marv, and talk about that process a little bit. What was that like? How receptive were they to having you reporting on this?
Amazingly receptive, because this has been a horribly dysfunctional family in many ways, even though those three are pretty close. Okay. But there's been dysfunction and there's been pain, and people often don't want to talk about that. And I remember when I sat down with Tracy, Todd's sister, and she was just kind of going off and on her father, and I think there's a quote in the story where she says, "This is really sick. I'm just telling you because you should have the facts." Mm-hmm. And it was sick, and a lot of it was sick. And the other thing is, you start to realize, three people can live in the same home and have different recollections and different reactions to the same events. Not so much factual recollections, but the things that stick out to them are not always the same. And I don't think Todd, because he was so into his own emotional trauma, understandably, had really a full appreciation for the pain that was being caused to his sister. And I don't think his sister had the empathy for him over the last 20 years that she probably would have liked to have had, because when you're dealing with an addict and you can't trust them over and over, there's a tendency to not get your hopes up anymore. You don't necessarily give up on them, but okay, I've heard this one again. So, but they were incredibly open. It was really unusual, because so often in this job, I'll talk to an agent or a PR person, and they'll be like, "Is this going to be a positive story?" Well, of course, I can't promise that to anybody.
Right.
So I never do. I say it's going to be an accurate story. But in this case, I joke with Tracy. I was like, this is the only time I remember someone saying it better not be too positive. Because they just wanted it to be accurate. They wanted it. That was all they really cared about. And that's what you would love from everybody, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah. And I thought the Tracy portions of the story were just remarkable, because it does kind of get into that other side, that untold story of, the Todd and Marv Marinovich story. Well, there's the sister involved too, and her reaction to what she was seeing growing up and kind of her inner life as well. It was a way the story leveled up, frankly, to be honest. It was just so like the another layer of it that I think that is easy, I think, especially for a lot of us in sports, to ignore. Like, we would talk about the quarterback and the dad relationship and the sports stuff, but the family stuff and the people who are kind of outside that inner circle, sometimes just the effect this has on them, I thought it was incredibly moving to read.
Well, thank you. And again, I felt that was essential, even from the beginning, when you find out that Marv has Alzheimer's, because it's a story of flawed people, determined people, each with their own personalities and interacting, and they each have an effect on the other. And you see Marv in the beginning, and it's just. And if he comes back in his present day state throughout the story, I want the reader to have a little bit of empathy for him. I don't want people to say, well, this is just a monster, and dismiss him. Nobody's two-dimensional. It's somebody who did some terrible things, sometimes out of this skewed idea of good intent. All of that. So, and I felt for Tracy, yeah, I mean, you can look at Todd as a victim, which Todd does not want people to necessarily see him as, but there are ramifications for other people. You know, it all plays off of each other. And I think a lot of dysfunctional families are like that. And this is just, it's kind of a window into it. And I think there's also, there's a bit of heroism there, I think, with Tracy for still doing what she believes is right and the best thing she can do, even though she doesn't want to do it, and it's not somebody who she thinks deserves that. This is just her nature, and she's doing it anyway.
What was that like when you were reporting on it? You paint this scene, you come back to it throughout the story of her showing pictures to Marv, family pictures, old pictures. And, you're very much in an observational mode and bringing the reader to there. How do you report that? What's that like for you being there, and kind of, how do you make yourself, that balance of being unobtrusive, so they're doing what they're doing, but still kind of seeing and being able to capture accurately what's going on?
Well, I was sitting right at the table with them, and I think Tracy and we went to lunch right after. And so when you see somebody in that situation with her father for a half an hour, and he's got Alzheimer's, and then her talking about him afterwards, you can realize she was acting when she was there with him. She was acting because she felt like, I'm going to try to give him one good half hour, even though he won't remember it. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that obligation was really interesting. So I sat there, I listened, I observed, I talked to Leo, the caretaker, for quite a while. And of course, he comes in with none of the baggage. I mean, talk about a hero.
Right.
This is a family that they've devoted their entire lives professionally to taking care of people with dementia. I mean, that is astounding. That's that they would do that. But you talk to him, and of course his view of Marv doesn't come with, again, all that baggage. So it's important to talk to a lot of people and get a full picture, even though you're not necessarily going to use everything in the story. But it helps, I think, for the writer kind of put things in context.
Right. When did you know you were done reporting this?
That's a funny question, because, and again, we're going to assume people have read the story by this point in our talk, but I had a deadline approaching, and while my deadline is coming, I know Todd is relapsing. And I don't even think at that point Todd knew that I knew, but I knew. I was talking to enough people for the story. And so I filed it, and I cannot remember ever doing this. I filed like 7,000 words to a couple editors, and I said, just read it and we'll talk.
Okay.
Because I think we had it slotted for an issue, and they read it, and I said, okay, now here's the problem. This is like on a Thursday or something like that. I said, Todd is supposed to go into detox. Like, he's supposed to go this weekend, and because he's an addict, you don't even. So he's relapsed. Supposed to detox. I think he's going to go, but I don't know for sure. I mean, he's an addict. You just never know, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, so we need to figure this out. And the family, I believe, Trudy, Todd's mom, actually, we talked, and she said, can you hold off until he's out and he can talk to you again, until he's been through rehab again? And I felt like that was both sensitive to him, because the last thing you want is to make the life worse for somebody in that situation, but also it made sense for the story completely. So I went back out to Arizona, where he's been, in December, and we had a good long talk, and we really we had some disagreements that we had to iron out, not big ones, but again, you're trying to get every word, every little detail kind of right. And so I would say I probably didn't know for sure I was done reporting until the week I filed it, I'm guessing.
Okay. And in terms of the writing process, like, you come back from months of reporting and all these interviews and all the people you've talked to and the research you've done, and so how do you turn that into a story? Like, how did you take that reporting? What was your process like for structuring and actually writing the piece? Well,
structure is everything, really. I mean, writing's obviously very important, but I probably spent more time just on the writing of this story than any story I can remember doing for SI, because of that reason. So we have a lot of different threads that I need to kind of weave in here. And in my mind, and this was, again, true to publication, I'm thinking, if I start burying what the thrust of the story is, no one's even going to read it. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, burying is like more than 200 words in, because that's the era we live in right now. So I wanted to keep Marv present, his present day form, which I think evokes a certain level of empathy and even sympathy. I wanted to keep that present so that when you're going into some of the terrible stuff he did, you couldn't just think of him as a monster. I wanted to keep Tracy present because you had to realize there were other people paying a price here for everything that happened. And we had to go back and forth from the past to the present, and really two presents, because it was Marvin Tracy and then it was Todd. This idea of this lie that he had lived for so long had to be in there. But before all of that, we had to establish what the original story was. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So
right.
There was a lot of writing and rewriting and tweaking to try to get that right, and to get the structure right. And in the end, I was pleased with it. But as I'm writing it, which is very common, sometimes I'm thinking, is anyone even going to read this thing? So, but you just have to try to do the best you can and hope it works out.
How many drafts did you go through, or do you was it kind of like an evolving thing, or did you have like one draft and then go through another one, or was it kind of more iterative?
Well, I never really. The idea of draft always confuses me, because if you rework one section, is that a new draft? I never really know the answer to that question. Maybe you do. I don't know.
I guess did you like write an entire like front to back story and then go back and rework parts of it? Did you like work on sections at a time? Like how did the actual kind of writing process go?
I guess that's why I'm confused. I don't write in a way that intelligent people would write a story. That's my problem. I will write in pieces. So I never just write the first sentence down to the last sentence, even for a 700-word column. It's very common for me to write the first sentence last. Mm-hmm. So I just wrote up little sections, and it's almost it's like a building block thing, like a Lego thing or something, where you're putting a little piece together and then you're putting another piece together. Well, maybe those two big pieces fit together. Well, maybe they don't. So you move that around, and there's a lot of that. And really, right up until through the editing process, like there was what I thought was a fascinating little moment that we ended up taking out. Editors found it a little jolting where it was in the story, and I couldn't. I would have loved to have kind of gotten another place, but Todd remembers in 1994, I believe it was, he was in a car in Alabama, and he heard on the radio that Kurt Cobain had killed himself. And he distinctly remembers thinking, I understand. And I just thought that, to me, was such a powerful little moment. But, when you do a story, if it's any good, the outtakes are good. I mean, that's just how it is. This is, I think it's a 6,500-word story, and you don't get a 6,500-word story, if it's any good, with 6,500 words of material. It's usually 20,000 words of good material that you had to whittle down to make sure you're telling the right story. So there were a lot of those little adjustments.
Well, I'm going to make sure all of my students listen to that, because I preach that constantly, to report way more than you're ever going to need for your final story. And I also write the way you do in sections. And again, I try to tell my students that, because it can be really easy, I think, for young writers especially, to kind of get paralyzed by not knowing the lead or the first sentence or how to end it or where to go. And I try to tell them constantly, just start writing. You can. Every time I do that, especially when I was writing for newspapers, the lead would come to me. Like if I started in the middle, I would start writing and I would figure out, I knew what my lead's going to be now. And it might be when I'm writing the middle third of the story, but the act of writing kind of tends to kind of loosen you up a little bit, and you kind of get a sense of what the story is about.
Right. And so for me, what I'll do, I'll transcribe everything, which I don't even know how many tens of thousands of words that ended up being. And then I just go through, okay, I want this. So I put the pieces of the transcription into a separate file and write that up, write that into something. So while I know I'm using the scene of him walking down the street or Tracy talking to Marv or whatever it is, I'm just going to write that. And you have 200 words there, 400 words there, and just a lot of thinking about it. You figure out the best story to tell, because, when you get down to it for a story, like, to me, reporting is, you find out secrets, and writing is how you choose to tell them, right? I mean, that's what that is. And so first you have to get those secrets. And when I say secrets, all I mean is bits of information that people don't already know. I mean, obviously you need those for any story. And then what's the most powerful way to tell these? That's where you structure. That's where you move things around. That's where you might hint at something later, and the reader doesn't even realize it until they get to the part later to try to make it work.
One question I wanted to raise, and I believe, I saw on Twitter, J.A. Adande raised it. And you can speak as much as you're comfortable on this, but given that this is the nature of the story and that it's been told so many times, and now this is a very kind of new version of the Todd Marinovich and the Marv Marinovich story, I guess, how did you come to trust that this one is true, whereas the other ones weren't?
Yeah, that was Jay's a friend of mine. That was a really good way of him asking that question. If this some person is lying, and it's like your parents told you when you were a kid, right? If you lie, nobody will ever believe you again.
Right.
So that was a fair question. Like, if he's been lying all this time, why would you believe it now? And the other thing people said was, well, now that Marv can't defend himself, he's going to say that he was abused, and then what? So there are probably a long list of reasons why I'm very comfortable with the story, and I'm sure I will forget some as I talk here, but I will give you a few. One, Todd was not shopping his story. Like I said, I got him after months of trying. He had no idea who he was. It wasn't like, well, now I want to tell people this is what really happened. At no point was he saying, this is why I made the mistakes. People keep blaming me. It was never that. It was, hey, I can't be angry. Who do I blame? I blame myself. I mean, right. He said that. It's not in the story, but he said that repeatedly. His brother, Mikhail, backed up, who lives in a completely different home but with the same father, basically said he had the same childhood, except Marv had slowed down just slightly, I think, by the time Mikhail was growing up. And Mikhail's body chemistry and personality are so completely different, actually more like Marv's, that he was like, the hell with you. Like, give me another one. I don't care. Huh. So he just reacted differently. So now we have two people saying this. Todd's mother told me about her being thrown across the table, which was in there, and she described several, I believe they had lawsuits even, although I didn't find that. It was from a long time ago, that they had to settle, or at least threats of lawsuits, because of fights Marv would get into. So that means that the Marv that Todd is describing fits in temperamentally with the Marv that his mother is describing. His sister completely understands it. A lot of the facts, for example, the not really adhering to the diet, which is in the story, like the sister said she knew that was always nonsense. That was never the case. So Tracy did. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, I met with Todd and his therapist. We talked about it. So is he either lying to his therapist for my story, even though he doesn't know I'm going to ask to meet with her, or has he convinced her to lie to me? No, I don't right. buy either of those things. So for all those reasons, and I'm sure others I could come up with, I felt comfortable with it. It all made sense.
Well, and it was interesting as I read this, as I was reading the story, the one parallel that kept coming to me was one of my favorite sports books, which is Andre Agassi's memoir, Open. And I don't think there was the physical abuse, from Andre Agassi's father on him and his family, but temperamentally, there were so many similarities. I felt my mind just going to that story and how familiar it felt from that perspective, which I just found interesting that it was that parallel was so stark to me.
Right, and there was I could see that completely. And the thing that there's a quote from Todd in the story where he was talking about when he got to the Raiders, and he's like, "Here I am, I've got all this money. This is like I've achieved everything I worked my whole life for, and I am miserable. Mm-hmm. What is wrong with me?" And I just think that's really something that I would think people can connect with, because what we think is success, what we think will lead to happiness, often just is not, right?
Right.
It is not. And you don't always know that until you go through it. And I thought that was really interesting, because Marv, in a completely sick, twisted way, was just another dad who wanted what was best for his kid. What he wanted, his definition of that, and how he tried to go with it, or along with it, and create it, was insane. But that root was there, and everybody in the family agreed on that. That in a ridiculous way, his intent was not selfish. His intent was not malicious. The execution of it was devastating, and it was misguided. And that's what I thought was really interesting. And that's, I'd always like to write a story with a lot of gray area. and as much as I could, I tried to get some into this one.
Mm-hmm. I ask everybody I have on my podcast this question, so I'll ask you, what is the best thing you've read lately?
The best thing I've read lately? That's an interesting question. I'm trying to, there's probably something on my bookshelf that I read recently that I loved, and I don't remember the last truly great book that I read. I read maybe a year ago a book called The Knicks by Nathan Hill that I thought was absolutely phenomenal. I don't know. There are a lot of good stories out there. I'm blanking. I have failed you. I'm sorry.
Well, I can say, I'm the best thing I've read lately is your story, but that sounds totally like self-serving to say that to you, even though it's true. But so I will say the thing I'm most looking forward to reading soon is I just got a copy of Sean Devaney's book, Fun City, John Lindsay, Joe Namath, and How Sports Saved New York in the 1960s. And it just sounds like incredibly interesting, like an incredibly fun story about an incredibly interesting time and place. I'm super looking forward to that one.
Those books, and I wrote one that I won't name because it will just seem like relentless self-promotion, but a book where you can kind of capture historical time through sports, where so many of us can connect through sports, and you have the benefit of distance, the benefit of looking back in history and understanding it better. Those to me are such a joy. So that sounds like a great one.
Right. And, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time with me. Again, the story is on SIA.com. We'll have it in show notes again, but I really appreciate you, going back over the story with me and taking the time.
Thanks so much, Brian. Take care.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.